because you're living for the next budget cycle. And so in my estimation of that, people wind up playing checkers when we should be playing chess. We need to look and see what the landscape looks like, not 2 years down the road, but 20 years down the road. And so taking the time to really think through what the problems are becomes an extremely important part of what we're doing. Somebody asked me before the last session, how's the higher ed business? I said, I'm not in the higher ed business, I'm in the people development business. Higher ed's just the tool. And the fact of the matter is, everybody in this room is in the people development business. If you do anything around young folks at all, you are in the people development business. And it's important to remember that. The problem for higher education right now is that confidence in higher education has plummeted. This is a Gallup poll from just June of this year. And if you look at this, 2/3 of Americans don't have confidence in higher education. There's multiple reasons for this when you look at it. There's public perception, and we'll talk about this a little bit in just a minute. The public perception of what exactly happens at colleges when kids go there. There's the whole thing about the cost of higher education. There's the thing about the return on investment. What kind of degrees are they getting? What can they do with those? And then a big part of this is people are talking about what's called the demographic and the enrollment cliff. For whatever reason, back in the early 2000s, young folks who were born then, you roll it forward now, and they're not having kids. It's estimated that between 2025 and 2030, there will be 15% fewer 18-year-olds going to college. 15% fewer. You've got 2,800 four-year colleges in the United States, and they're all going to be jockeying for 15% fewer 18-year-olds. In addition to that, there's what's called the demand cliff. Everybody knows who Micro is, the micro phenomenon, the dirty jobs guy. Yep. He's the one that says, look, not everybody's made to go to college. You can go out, and if you're a master plumber, master electrician, you can have a great life, which is absolutely true. Not everybody is made for college. As a consequence, in 2015, 70% of high school graduates wound up going to college. The number is now 62%. So not only are there fewer 18-year-olds, fewer of them are deciding to go to college when they get out of school. And the last thing is the destination cliff. And this is really important in the state of Texas. Every year in the state of Texas, we have about 20,000 kids from out of state that come into Texas to go to school. But at the same time, we have 38,000 that live here, that grew up here, that leave the state to go to school. So it's a deficit every year of 18,000 kids, and a lot of them don't move back when they go off to college. So these are all things that in higher education we better be thinking about. If we're not thinking about these things, we are whistling past the graveyard. So let's talk about the world that we're living in right now. If you look at this, this is a very busy slide, and I'm going to run you through this real fast. And this is the world's population over the last 200 years. If you go back and look over the last 200 years, and I'm going to go through this quickly. 200 years ago, in 1820, 84% of the world's population lived in poverty. 84% of the world's population lived in poverty. Now, 9% of the world's population lives in poverty. 200 years ago, 83% had no education. Today, 86% do have an education. Again, worldwide. Literacy, 88% of people could not read 200 years ago. Today, 86% of people can read. 200 years ago, 99% of the globe did not live in a democracy. Now, over half the globe lives in a democracy. Vaccinations, 200 years ago, nobody's vaccinated. Now, if you look at this, 86% of the world's population is vaccinated for the basic things. 200 years ago, 43% of children died before the age of 5. Now, 96% of kids live through their infancy. The world is dramatically different than it was 200 years ago. Why is this? To a large extent, this is because of the Industrial Revolution that occurred in Western Europe that spread worldwide with a lot of the basic necessities of things. However, there's something more that goes on with this, and I'm going to put up here a very interesting phenomenon. If you look at these trends right after the Second World War, they changed dramatically even at that point in time. Something happened after the Second World War that really put these things on steroids, that really accelerated these wonderful trends that we're talking about. What was that? If you look at what's happening globally right now, deaths from natural disasters have plummeted since the Second World War. Food supply worldwide, including in sub-Saharan Africa, has skyrocketed since the Second World War. Global access to electricity is up. Global access to drinking water is up. Global access to sanitation, public sanitation is up. If you look at developed nations like the United States, the amount of work that we do per week has actually dropped. If you go back to 1950, on average, people worked in the United States 44 hours a week. Now, on average, people work 35 hours per week. If you look at the percentage of money that we spend on necessities, that's also plummeted. If you go back to 1900, more than 80% of our income was spent on food, shelter, and clothing. Today, less than half of our income is spent on food, shelter, and clothing. That's an important trend that we're going to talk about in just a sec. If you look at the red line, the houses that we live in for starter homes are bigger than they were when we were kids growing up, and the number of people per household has gone down. So we have fewer people living in bigger houses in the United States. What is this about? It's about capitalism. Now, I always tell our young friends that call themselves socialists, if you have one of these, you can call yourself whatever you want. You're a capitalist. Because the fact of the matter is, it is the American free enterprise system that has driven this, that has accelerated this trend since the Second World War. Not just in the United States, but globally. And so we're living in a very different world. But why doesn't it feel that way? Why doesn't it feel like society's on the right track? There was a Monmouth survey that was done last year. 74% of Americans felt like the country's heading the wrong way. An NBC poll that was done showed the same trend, and the demographers were saying they've never seen this level of pessimism since they've been doing these analyses. So we're living in a world that by any objective measure is far, far, far better than what our grandparents lived in. And yet, we're all pessimistic about everything. Why is it that suicide rates have skyrocketed, especially with young people? Well, I got a theory. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Everybody remember this from psychology in school? All right, the whole idea behind this is at the base of the pyramid, physiological needs, food, shelter, clothing, things of that nature. You've got to take care of those things before you can start worrying about other things at the upper end of this pyramid, like self-actualization and self-esteem and all that. Once you take care of the things at the bottom of the pyramid, you can start living at the top of the pyramid. Now, I'm going to go back and use a trend that I had spoken about a minute ago, and this is food, shelter, and clothing. So, at the beginning of the Second World War, households were still spending 75% of their income on food, shelter, and clothing. And yet, at the beginning of the Second World War, this is called the North Platte Canteen, North Platte, Nebraska. A group of women knew that this was the East-West Railroad for all the soldiers that were going off to the war. So they started meeting there every day, and as they would stop at the train station for water, they would make sure these soldiers had food, clothing, all these things, all these amenities of home. But what's interesting about that, they did this every day until every soldier was back after the Second World War. Now think about this. If you look at this trend, they were living up here. 75% of their income was on food, clothing, and shelter. So when these kids came through at the station and they're giving them jackets and they're giving them food, they're giving them things that they need. So if they're baking a cake for these kids, that means they're not going to get a cake. If you did this today and said, okay, we got soldiers, sailors, and airmen going back and forth. And what do they need? They need an iPhone. Let's give them an iPhone. But not any iPhone. You're going to give them your iPhone. Do you think they would do that? Partly, again, if you look at 1940, they were still living at the bottom of this pyramid. Today, we're living at the top of this pyramid. Put it another way, in 1940 it was about we. Today it's about me. This is the first time in our history that young people can instantly know their popularity by a thumbs up or a thumbs down on a social media posting. This is a dangerous thing in education as far as I'm concerned. When you overlay it with social media right now, there's a company called Reboot, social critic group, and they look at trends. This is called the TikTok Challenge. It was done last year. TikTok now has over 1 billion users. It surpassed Google as the #1 popular global site. 2/3 of American kids use TikTok. This is the Reboot survey. 64% of teenagers said they would rather give up their right to vote than give up social media.
Wow.
59% of young voters 18 to 24 said they would rather give up their right to vote than to give up social media. This is the problem. Everybody remembers reading 1984 when we were all kids in school? In the book 1984, what was it that Orwell feared? Orwell feared Big Brother, government stepping in to control things, books being banned, government depriving people of information, the truth being concealed from everybody, becoming a captive culture and being controlled by torture and being controlled by the thing that society hates. Well, what's important to remember is that Aldous Huxley wrote another dystopian novel 17 years before, back in 1931, called Brave New World. Most people don't remember Brave New World. They all remember Orwell's 1984. But in Brave New World, Huxley said, forget about Big Brother. Technology is going to destroy our capacity to think. There is no need to ban books. People won't want to read books anymore. There will be so much information that people will become self-absorbed about things. You don't need to worry about the government depriving people of any information. The truth is not concealed from you. The truth becomes drowned in a sea of irrelevance. We don't become a captive culture, we become a trivial culture. People are not controlled by torture, they're controlled by pleasure. And it's not what society hates that rules them, it's what society loves that winds up ruling them. So on the left, if you look at a society that I'm describing that Orwell was predicting, that would be today's China. Unfortunately, and as problematically, if you look at the future that Huxley was predicting, that's the United States. This is hugely problematic for our futures. When I titled this thing, The Battle for America's Future, I really do believe this. Now, there's great science, there's great hope about things. We've got a lot of great young people. But the way we're trending is really problematic in many areas. Do you think there's a reason why Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates never let their kids partake in technology? Do you think that perhaps certain values that we all hold dear in society have become dormant because we've all become so self-absorbed? These are things that we've got to think about as the adults in the room. During the Constitutional Convention, after days and days and days of beating through this thing in Philadelphia, when Franklin came out, a woman asked him, she said, Mr. Franklin, what kind of government have you given us? And what was his reply? A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it. Having an educated, engaged population is the only way to maintain a republic. And we've got a younger generation, many of whom are completely disengaged from what's going on, and they live in a soundbite world. So in higher education, Einstein summed it up real well. The value of college education is not in the learning of many facts, it's in the training of the mind to think. Critical thinking, communication skills, being able to have conversations with somebody with whom you disagree, without shouting them down, without getting offended, but having real conversations with things. Mark Cuban was doing a podcast, he was being interviewed at a podcast, and the fellow said to him, they were talking about generic medication, because Cuban's involved in that. And the fellow said, he goes, we're also doing things in higher education as well. And he goes, oh yeah, because that's another problem. And the guy said, yeah, but we have powerhouse universities like Harvard. And Cuban said, oh, forget Harvard, give me Texas Tech every day. Cuban doesn't have any affiliation with Texas Tech. He did. He does now. The fact of the matter is, there's a grit. There's a grit. And I didn't go to Tech for any of my education. But being out there, you see this grit, this can-do attitude that is incredible. It's not just an anecdotal thing from Mark Cuban. There's a group of headhunters that about every 4 or 5 years, they survey this group of over 300 headhunters about where do you go to get people that these companies want in their employment. Number 9 on the list was Texas Tech. Out of 2,800 four-year schools, I went to UT for medical school. UT was 23, A&M was 25. Not bad schools. Not Texas Tech, though. Come on. Anyway, no, we have folks that have this can-do attitude, and it's an important thing. We're teaching people how to make a living. So when they have a degree that says accounting, a degree that says engineering, they should be good at that degree. Is higher education relevant? Well, of course it is. People with college degrees, they have more job opportunities. They earn more money. They have a better quality of life. These things have been studied again and again and again. But are there problems in higher education? You better believe there are. One of the things that has become problematic, if you look at this is one of our handouts that we have for our, what we call our values-based culture. Leaders drive values. Values drive behaviors. Behaviors drive the culture of your company, and your culture drives your performance. Now, there are people in all walks of life that as long as the leader is getting results, they don't care how they get them. And for them, the end justifies the means. That is so antithetical to everything we are as a nation. The end does not justify the means.
Amen.
So we've got, our son just graduated with his MBA from Harvard because he got his brains from his mother. We were up there for Charlie's graduation in May. And they had the Harvard Crimson out there. They're handing out copies of it. And I get one, and this is done by the undergrad at Harvard. And this was a survey, and something in there struck me when I looked at it. This is May of this year. This is the question they were posing to graduating seniors. Have you ever cheated in an academic context at Harvard? 47% said yes, including 33% of the students that graduated with a 4.0. 30% said they had used AI for work. We're teaching our children that the end justifies the means. Again, that is so much against everything that we've been. This is why it's important to understand the value of values. Why is this important? Many folks wonder what kind of world we're leaving to our children. In higher education, it'd be wise to consider what kind of children we're leaving to our world. There's a lot of work to be done in this. Now, when we go to Austin as a state agency, you sit down in front of House Appropriations, you sit down in front of the Senate Finance Committee, and you've got our friends on the left, and you've got our friends on the right. If you ask our friends on the left, there's nothing wrong with higher education. They just need more money. People need to stay out of their way, just give more money. If you ask our friends on the right, we're not doing anything except creating a bunch of pinko commies, and we better fix that. You know? The fact of the matter is, I always tell everybody, our job in higher education is not to make Democrats. Our job is not to make Republicans. That is not our job. Our job is to make sure that when our kids walk across the stage, they're workforce ready. Our job is to make sure that they're critical thinkers. Our job is to make sure they're problem solvers. Our job is to make sure they have high emotional intelligence, and we need a lot of work on this. Our job is to make sure that they welcome other viewpoints. Our job is to make them leaders in their community. If they do that, as far as our future, it doesn't matter if they're Democrats or Republicans. It doesn't matter. If they welcome other folks' views, if they're good critical thinkers, then they can work to solve problems together.
Right, exactly.
There's a movie that just came out on Reagan. One of the most fascinating parts of this movie to me, do you know the first person that Nancy Reagan allowed to see her husband after he was shot? Tip O'Neill. All right, Tip O'Neill, the liberal Speaker of the House from Massachusetts, politically was 180 degrees from Ronald Reagan. They were best buddies. Can you imagine today? If somebody, Trump or Biden get shot, yeah, bring in Donald. Let me see you. This is how problematic this has become for us. And we've got to do something to right the ship of state. Why do you do what you do? I can tell you why I do what I do. Those are my 3 grandbabies. And we have a 4th one on the way. Our children are the messages we send to a time that we will not see. This is a battle for our future. The best time to plant your trees 20 years ago. Second best time is today. That's my last slide. Wow. Okay. We have time for questions if you guys have. Yes, sir.
Hey, I just want to say thank you. I'm a design firm, and we recruit at Texas Tech, and you do Texas Tech. Texas Tech, I'm an Aggie, but Texas Tech does prepare y'all's graduates for the workforce. You do a very good job. We love recruiting from Texas Tech.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? I would like to remind everyone that this presentation will be on the share drive, so y'all can all see this after Will does his recap.
Okay, guys, thank y'all very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell.